And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Kyle Bowen. And Kyle is the Director of Education Technology Services at Penn State University, formerly Purdue. I could go on and on talking. He's a TED speaker that gives TED Talks. His work has been published in the New York Times and many other publications. He could probably give speeches on anything we're talking about today, whether it's mobile or maker spaces or teaching methods, badging, etc. But his talk today is entitled New Ideas for New Learning Experiences. Please join me in welcoming Kyle Bowen.
Thank you very much. Oh, good. Can you hear me okay? Am I too loud? Do I need to go up or down here? Uh-oh, maybe too far. Anyways, thanks for having me this morning. I'm really excited to be talking with you today. For those of you who hadn't had a chance to meet yet, I'm a really warm and fuzzy guy, so as you have any questions today, please feel free to just kind of shout them out as we go along. Really, as we're talking today, the way I like to think about this, hold on a second, I need to switch into my slides real quick. Oh, I see. Oh, they got consolidated. All right, good. So as we're talking today, the way I like to preface these kinds of conversations is as like a weather report, right? A weather forecast. Now this metaphor works better in places where they have weather, right? So imagine you live in a place that has snow and rain and things like that. That there is a prediction, there is a forecast that happens. And it's not, as we know, it can be right a lot of the times, but sometimes it's not. But a lot of what we have to do is we have to think about that. We have to think about what is that thing that's next, and then we have to begin to experiment with that. And so as I talk today, my intent isn't to describe this is how you should do it, but rather this is ways of doing it. And it's not about the particular technology or the particular design, but rather it's the approach. It's the concepts that sit behind it. And especially in this case where between our institutions, between Penn State and Pepperdine, there are a lot of differences, right, that exist. And so the intent is not to say that this is necessarily a right way, but rather a way to think about and approach some of these ideas. And a lot of this fits into a lot of the themes of the day. So as I talked with the organizers last night, learning about some of the themes, I was like, okay, then I can conceptualize and think about how do we attract students into these types of interactions. Now, it was kind of fortuitous that this event came up because I had business in Las Vegas earlier in the week. And so I was able to drive down here yesterday. And so now, I don't know about any of you, but I absolutely love taking road trips. Right now, I don't mean those road trips that you took in college that maybe you don't quite remember. I mean the road trips you took with your parents that you wish you didn't remember, right? These were the trips where you'd ride in the backseat of the family car with your brother or sister battling for control of the line. Oh, we all know this line, right? It's a seam that runs down the middle of the back seat, creates a no-fly zone that separates two halves of the car. Many a battle has been waged over this line. Now, my parents, in an effort to draw a truce between my sister and I, they invested in travel board games. All right, a travel board game is fairly simple. What you do is you take a regular-sized game and then you shrink it down until it's not really fun anymore, right? So if you thought Monopoly was frustrating before, wait till you're playing it with a pair of tweezers. And Connect 4 travels well enough, but the pieces are so small, we're losing them all the time. And after a while, we're playing Connect 3, and let's just face it, that's tic-tac-toe. So we have this same challenge as we think about what happens inside of the classroom, right? That we can't just take the things we've done before and just shrink them down or do them in a slightly different way. What we have to do is kind of begin to reinvent, to reinterpret. Because what happens is that when we begin to just kind of shim technology into a space, we have unintended consequences like this. This is called the cone of distraction. And the cone of distraction is a fairly simple idea. It says if you have a student sitting at the front of the classroom with their laptop open, it will create a cone-shaped area of distracted students behind them, right? And you can calculate the size of this cone, where radius 1 is your screen diagonal. Somebody doing it right now, right here. Radius 1 is the screen diagonal of your laptop, and radius 2 is what we call the probability of PowerPoint, meaning the more boring your slides are, the bigger that cone will tend to get. Now, a lot of times what we see is as our students adopt this technology, an unintended consequence, right? These are the texting dead. We see these on our campus as students are using their phones, they're kind of wandering into intersections and things like that. Because students today have unprecedented access to technology. It's not unreasonable to believe that a student in the classroom has 3 or more internet-connected devices on them while they're in the space. I recently met a student the other day who he had Wi-Fi-enabled bike pedals on his bicycle. It's like we can't begin to imagine all of the different ways, all the different types of devices that our students will bring to bear as part of their own learning. And for this reason, we begin to reinterpret what we've long held to be true. Right? So even Maslow needs a revisit that before learning can happen, we must start with Wi-Fi and power. As our students come into the spaces, there is a difference in expectation, right? The expectation to be blown away. But that yields other types of realities, doesn't it? And we see this sadly from time to time. So for that reason, what we want to do is think about what does an experience for our student look like? Now we tend to operate in a spectrum. Right, that we have formal experiences like the classroom that exist at one end, and informal experiences like the library, other collaborative areas that exist at the other end. What we want to do is begin to think about what does something in the middle look like? Something that has hallmarks of both. Something that is an informal space where students can be creative, but then has the structure that is meant for a kind of formalized activity. In other words, we want to think about what does it look like for something to have its serious side, but also know how to party. So that's what we want to look at is think about authenticity, right? So what is an authentic environment? What does an authentic experience look like for our students? And what we want to do are think about experiences and not spaces, right? What is the thing we're trying to accomplish? What is the thing we're not trying to get to? Not necessarily where is it happening. So the first example I'd like to talk about is our one-button studio, and as I understand, there are a couple of them here, which is great. So I want to talk about a slightly different perspective. And I'll give a quick overview. So one of the challenges we were facing is students who were needing to learn how to perform, and perform through public speech, right? And there's this adage, and you've probably heard before this idea, if you're really nervous, you're supposed to imagine an audience in their underwear, as if that's supposed to help. Because can you imagine anything more horrifying than talking to a room full of people in their underwear? But the idea is, how do we begin to create an experience for our students and begin to alleviate those kinds of anxiety? And so through using the one-button studio, we were able to kind of introduce students to these public speaking experiences and begin to reduce their levels of anxiety through practice. Through this, they're able to perform and fail time and time again, and then have those recordings to reflect back onto. Now, if you're not familiar with the one-button studio, how it works is fairly simple. You walk into the studio with a thumb drive, you plug it in, you hit a button, and that turns on the lights and the cameras, and it starts recording. And when you're done, you hit the button, and it puts the video on your thumb drive, and you walk out. So it's a fully automated studio experience. A single student can operate it by themselves. And so what that looks like visibly is something like this, right, if you haven't seen one. And it has projection and cameras and lights and everything all built into it. Now, from a performance standpoint, at Penn State, we have these at all of our campuses. So like you, we have a number of different campuses, and we put them there. But what we do is we attract and bring students into this. And what we see is the applications are far and wide. And so these are our 2 primary one-button studios that exist in our main library. And these 2 studios alone will service about 10,000 students each year. And what happens is that students make use of this in any way they can imagine, from practicing, student actually practicing a TED Talk here. We see them used to practice dissertation defenses. We've seen them used to produce rap videos, puppet shows, art performances. So about anything you can imagine that needs recording, it's a fairly simple tool to begin to capture and practice and fail many times over. Oh, I'm going to get rid of this goofy student. I'll turn his sound off. Anyway, so what happens is then the students begin to teach each other about how to take advantage of these kinds of tools. So this is a student just kind of talking through how you might take advantage of the space and use it as part of your own coursework. Like I mentioned, we have in each semester, or it's about 5,000, a little over 5,000 students, about 10,000 students a year, give or take, in our primary locations. And so really through that kind of high throughput, it can be embedded as part of courses. And so we see it not only as part of public speaking, but as part of performance, as part of English. In English, they do a lot of digital storytelling, and so they can use the one-button studio as kind of an authoring tool inside of that environment. This is another great example of a student who who engaged in an undergraduate research project. And so what she was doing was studying the effect of a particular enzyme on autism. And so through that, she was able to create a video and talk about her experience and relay what she had done through her research to anyone that was interested in doing it. And so in many ways, the use of these kinds of video technologies become supporting, enabling infrastructure for research and making it possible to tell research stories, even in the case of freshmen who are engaged in what we call undergraduate scholarship. Now, another area of creativity that we found in terms of the development of video or media, and one of the challenges is as students work in groups to produce media, right? One of the challenges is like, what does the workflow look like? So you have a computer sitting there and you have a group of people trying to use it, 3 or 4 people trying to use a computer to create. And so one of the things we've transitioned to is what we call mobile media. So essentially what we have is a collection of iPad minis that have been pre-outfitted with a collection of media editing tools. And then as courses want to have these kinds of experiences that they can take and more or less check out this lab and then go out into the field and engage in creative functions. So we see this happening inside of the lab where they can begin to use it to connect to reference material, capture imagery off their microscopes, these kinds of things. But then we can also have students taking them out into the field. So this is a student in a marsh outside of Harrisburg. And the nice part is that they can capture this media, edit it, and share it all in the field, all off of the one device at a relatively low cost. So we don't have to fully outfit, we don't have to go to a one-to-one scenario where every student has one of these, but rather having a kind of checkout collection. So as instructors want to make use of it, they can. So we see this applied a lot in science, but we also see it applied in nursing and in other disciplines that can make use of this type of work inside of the field. Here's a quick just kind of list of, and I'm happy to share out all the slides afterwards. You don't have to get them down or anything. Next one I want to talk about is experiences. And so earlier in the introduction we touched on virtual reality as part of that. And virtual experiences is something that's growing relatively quickly right now. And what we're seeing is this kind of stratification of different types of virtual experiences. And it goes from things like immersive movies, which is like the 3D movies that you go and see in the theater, to 360 movies, to virtual reality, so this is where it completely replaces reality, to augmented reality, which is the kind of highest form where you're still seeing reality, but yet imagery is being projected into your line of sight. What we're seeing is if we look at this on a matrices or of different types of interactions, we're seeing this kind of stratification, right, that says that there's a maturity versus scale in our ability to do this. And one of the ones that's most interesting right now is around 360 video, because it's the most mature and the easiest to adopt in a lot of ways. So from an equipment standpoint, it's fairly simple. It's a 360 camera, right? And then using a common set of video editing tools. And then in this case, we also use a Samsung Gear headset. We check these kits out to our students, or we deliver them out to our campuses, and they're able to take them out into the field. Now, one of the interesting parts about this is that, we have to think about the consumption of video like this, because it's not a traditional experience. So we're not really thinking anymore about where a student is, but rather where they have the potential to be, right? Which is a very different transition to go into. And from our standpoint, this has transitioned us into thinking differently about some spaces. So we've just opened, actually we'll soon be opening, and we're 99% done, our Immersive Experiences Lab, which is based on this idea of editing, creating 360 video. And so that students can get hands-on access to the technology, they can go out into the field, capture this as part of study abroad. It's been incredibly popular use of it. So we had a group of students who were going to Ireland and studying ruins, but then we also get 360 video of the kind of Irish pubs. But they can bring back and kind of experience this and share this with students who did not go on the same trip, right? And talk about and reflect on those experiences and capture that in a 360 environment. This is an example. These videos are kind of hard to show as videos, so this is kind of a still of it being used in agriculture. So this is where students are demonstrating, in this case, the safe use of an Oxy-Acetylene torch. And what's interesting about this is one of those that demonstrates why the 360 is relevant, is because if you look at the sparks being thrown by the torch, they're beginning to land over by that tractor, which has fuel in it. And so now, in a video setting, the sparks you would never have seen, but now we're seeing the entire context. And so from a safety perspective, we can begin to evaluate this critically and have a discussion about, okay, we're seeing the entire environment. We can see everywhere one of these sparks lands. Let's talk about why this may be a problem, why we may have chosen not the right place to film this video. So it's a really interesting example. And then the last thing I want to talk about before we're going to launch into a short activity here is talking about fluency of making, right? And so that's where the evolution of makerspaces is an important one. But in reality, it has with it a certain challenge, which is making is not something everybody is immediately comfortable with, right? That it can look a lot of different ways, but not everybody is thrilled about the idea of making a thing, right? So what we want to do is think about, rather, what is the fluency that we want our student to have? What we want to do is combine creativity, collaboration, critical thinking into a singular activity. What we want to do is, one, shift tension away from making a thing, right? Now, it's interesting because we're making something, but what we want to do is focus on the activity of making. We want to focus on the activity of trying to create, of failing, in other words. Second thing we want to do is actually do less, right? So a lot of our popular views of what a makerspace is has lots of stuff in it, and lots of tools to do lots of things. In reality, what we're discovering is the most effective makerspaces are the ones that have fewer options in them. Because you don't, in order to make use of it, you have to have an understanding of the technology, you have to have an understanding of the tools, you have to know how to solder and things like that. But if we actually eliminate that entry-level knowledge required, we can begin to engage a broader collection of students. Third is that without guidance, a makerspace is just a space, right? So this idea is that having people in the space that can help guide what happens there, in a lot of cases these can be students, I'll touch on this just a second, is an important transition. Because what it does is it gets, staring at that blank page can be very intimidating. I could do anything. So having somebody help me structure that interactivity can be very helpful. And then the other is to realize that making happens across curricular borders, right? There is no discipline for which it doesn't directly apply to. It's just a matter of thinking about it in different ways. So let's explore this really quickly, what this looks like. So from our standpoint, we create what's called the Maker Commons. And so this is our main university campus. So our main campus is about 40,000 students. So our primary Maker Commons space is about a little over 200 square feet. And to support several thousand students each year in these types of making activities. And you'll notice that it doesn't look necessarily like a makerspace like you traditionally think about, because what we did was, again, we focus on having fewer options in here. So one thing we did was we created 3D printing as like this virtualized service. So we have one large 3D printing farm that is available to all of our students, even if they're taking courses online or they're at one of our campuses across Pennsylvania. And by printing there, what we do is we use the interlibrary loan system to move the prints out to the different campuses. So in the same way that the libraries can move a book, you can move a print, and we just package it up and ship it out that way. What that allows us to do is provide a lot more scale at a lower cost. And we can also engage a lot more students because they don't have to necessarily engage the machine direct. They just go online and submit their print that way, and they can come pick it up at the library. But then the other part of it, which is right next door, is what we call our Invention Studio. And again, this is, well, it's here, 161 square feet. And so through this, we have 4 tables. The tables are reserved by students, usually working in pairs, sometimes in groups of 3 or 4. And what they do is they work together to invent. And they use a very small collection of tools. We leverage little bits quite a bit. If you're not familiar with little bits, they're like Legos that stick together. You can connect them to the internet. You can build robots and machines out of them. And then what they do is they work together to plan out their creation of a device or an invention, and then they execute it. And as part of that, we have, like I said, we provide guidance. In this case, we have our makers in residence, which are students who work inside of the space and work in a peer-to-peer way to help the other students with their projects. Our makers in residence, we pull some from technology and some from the arts, right? And so that's where they can work together and kind of cross-pollinate a lot of different kinds of thinking in there. And like I said, we see this in a broad range of disciplines. So one of the first courses to make use of this makerspace was an English writing class. And so they were thinking about it in terms of, you know, the traditional arcane writing prompt of, okay, document how you make a peanut butter and jelly or something like that, right? We've all probably even had that one. What they do now is they say, okay, go invent. And then let's write about that. We can document the invention, we can reflect on the invention, we can help sell that invention to somebody else. We can use that prompt as a way to explore a lot of different areas of writing, especially in technical writing. But then we also have the other more technical applications. So on the right are the rockets. So this is also a very popular use for courses where they 3D print rockets and they take them out by the stadium and launch them up, or watch them blow up on the ground. That happens sometimes too. So we can see this wide range of applications of these kinds of tools. I'm going to skip that one and go straight to our activity now. So a lot of what I've talked about here are around creating these experiences, right? The intent being, how do we create a construct for students to be creative? Again, that idea of looking at a blank canvas is a very intimidating one. So if you tell a student you can do anything, there's few things more horrifying than that, right? What we want to do is create a construct, create a framework for students to be creative. And so that's what we're going to do with the balance of our time today, is that you all are going to be creative inside of a very structured activity here. So up here, and you're already sitting in groups, which is helpful. And if you're by yourself, kind of join. There's one person by themselves, so if you kind of hop over. So work in your small groups. And what we have up here are 3 boats, right? And there's a pile of them up here. So designate one of your folks to pick one up. So we have 3 boats up here. Each boat has a hole in it. And so here's our goal. Make a boat that holds as many pennies as possible before sinking. Right? So what we have up here are boats. You're allowed 2 binder clips, right? 2 rubber bands, and 4 straws. All right? 2, 2, and 4, and 1 boat. Now you notice there's 3 different kinds of boats, so you can pick any kind of boat you want. The colors don't mean anything, they're just colors. So with that, again, what we want to do is send somebody up here, pick up your items, sit down, kind of design a solution, and then when you're ready, I got my tubs of water up here and I got some pennies. Bring on up and try to get through at least one iteration and try to get your boat to hold the greatest number of pennies without sinking. Any questions about the activity? All right, this is your last chance. There will be no questions after this. All right, so send a person up to get your boat. Two straws, or I'm sorry, 4 straws, 2 rubber bands, 2 binder clips. Thank you for having me. This is great. Four straws, binder clips. Oh, hey, there was a, no, you want to hold, yeah, you, no, it's the Nittany Lion, it's our mascot. I don't know, they sneak into the bag sometimes. You can keep it if you want. No, they pretty much do their own thing at this point, so okay. I appreciate it. It's kind of a self-guided, yeah. When's the session supposed to end? Can you remind me? Okay. Wait. I do have a. No, I'm good. Thank you. 9:40. Oh, good. All right. That'll be great. Oh, Kyle. I'm sorry. It was Priscilla. Okay. Thank you, Priscilla. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. This is a great group.
Are you local to the area?
No. Oh, yeah.
physics, and I said, what's that in English?
There's plenty of boats if you want to. You could break into two if you wanted to. Sure.
I feel like there's something about this
No. There was a question about you don't have to use everything. So you can use as much or as little of it as you want to. There you go. There you go. Now start putting pennies in one at a time and count them as you go. $13. All right, so far 13 is the number.
Okay, took on water. I mean, yeah.
You got a couple of minutes to reiterate if you want. There you go. So how many are you at now? 12. 12. So as you get closer on your design, go ahead and bring it up, and we can give it a run. I think 13 is currently the score to beat. That one's going to be a 0. Here, go on. Oh. Oh, how many do we have? 8. You get points for style on that one, though. It has a very nice symmetrical design. Good.
Yeah?
Give it a run. Give it a run. Oh, yeah. We'll talk about that one. So we just got a couple of minutes left. If you haven't given your boat a try, bring it on up. Oh, please, you're welcome. I can send you a model to print the boats with if you want. Yeah. No. No. 16. Oh. 7. 16. All right. Can I have your boat? Can I keep it? Thank you. 16. All right. Can I borrow yours? Thank you. All right. I think I got 2 groups still out. 7. Oh, I got it right here. 16 is right there. Oh, was there? Oh, yeah. Take 2, yeah? All right. We're still. You got 1 this time. And there it goes. Oh, is that 21? Oh, good. This, oh, you were in the back there? Yeah, great. I just want to make sure you got in before we were.
First step, hooray! Already a small victory. You gotta balance them.
Is anybody not gone yet? Just real quick. I think we got the last groups coming up now. Okay. Yes, please. 21. All right.
Whoa, congratulations.
There it is. There it is.
Oh, you're. That count? Sure. Well, it's not disallowed. Part of the design. Are you allowed to freeboard?
What's that?
Are you allowed to freeboard?
Sure. It's a risky move, though.
Yeah, you gotta be
Sure. There's not generally much benefit to. Yeah. All right. 1 minute left. 1 minute. You down it goes. Down it goes. Oh no. Oh, you're going straight for the gold, and then see if it holds.
Do you think it would be airtight? Hey. All right.
5. All right, got 20 seconds left here.
Okay.
Make it your last go.
It's up to you, Daniel. Fit 16 more pennies on there.
25 is 25. Hey, good. There you go. There you go. All right. You're taking on water. What's that? Yeah, it's. You have 5. Oh, okay, great. I'll just make. Yeah. All right. Oh, I don't know. All right, so the. All right, so to debrief, our goal was again to have a boat that holds as many pennies as possible before sinking. All right, so the first question I always ask is, did anybody take a picture of their boat before they brought it up? Anybody do it? Or while it was floating? No? Okay. Oh, yeah, it's sunk, yeah. So this is interesting. So we had the high 26. Where's the group that had this one? 26 on this one? I'm trying to remember. Whose boat is this? I can't remember. Yeah, there we go. And then this one was a 21, right, over there? Good, okay. So we have 2 different ideas of the challenge here. So one is this, where essentially it sits on the water and they held 21 pennies, right? So use the straws to kind of overcome the hole in the boat. And then this one, we created legs to make it stand on the bottom of the thing, right? So the max is generally all of the pennies, right? So it's somewhere around 100. And so the general design, and usually people are curious, like, how do you do it? And so and I've seen variations on it, but essentially you take the boat and a binder clip, and then you just clip it to the side of the tub, right? Or you can get variations on the leg theme, or you can fashion the legs to actually wrap around the tub. You can do a lot of different ways. I've also seen it where they'll wrap the rubber bands around the tub and then just sit the boat on top of the rubber bands. So you can do it a lot of different ways. But there's always, these variations tend to come up because as we think about it, we can begin to challenge the notion of what is a boat, first of all, right? So, and then what does it mean to sink, right? So we never said it had to float. And so if we also think about, there are boats in our world, like, let's say, drilling platforms that sit out in the ocean, right? There are styles where they actually sit on the bottom of the ocean, and they still, so they don't technically float, but they also don't sink. We can also have boats that sit on land, right? So if I have a rowboat and it's just sitting on the shore, it's still a boat. It just doesn't have to be floating right now, right? So we can begin to challenge assumptions around what does it mean to be a boat. The other thing that gets interesting is, and which is why we provide multiple shapes, is that some shapes are more buoyant than others, right? So as we look at the shapes, when we think boat, we tend to think of something kind of like a rowboat, right? Something like this. Well, it really doesn't matter because it's not going anywhere, so it doesn't even need to look like a boat. And so that's where, when we do this, like with engineering students, they immediately go to usually circles because they're generally going to be more buoyant than a square, but they don't have to look anything like a boat to float. So it's kind of this interesting set of challenges that we get into to think about what are all the different ways that we can essentially not sink, right? What questions do we have about this activity? So again, the intent here is to kind of challenge our assumptions about what do the activities look like? How do we begin to be creative? So in this case, we had 15 minutes to think about and engage each other. And so in your small groups, you collaborated, discussed critically inside of your group. Okay, how are we going to do this? What does this look like? And then from there, you can iterate on that design. So some people came up a couple of times to try to iterate through that, right? And to try and solve a problem. So you can think creatively inside of that. In this case, you're thinking creatively very quickly, right, to solve what is actually a relatively complex problem that also has a number of distractors to it, like the hole, right? Is the hole even relevant to this problem? Or is it just, it's kind of a MacGuffin in reality, because you can solve the problem without even plugging the hole. And so that's where, in some cases, is the goal of the project to fix the hole, or is it just to make it not sink, right? So as we think about it creatively, we can begin to use that. And so the intent of this, though, is to think about how do we use, in this case, challenges, right? We like to think about these as design challenges, as ways to engage students in these kind of creative, interactive projects, and do it in such a way that we can kind of drive towards the types of outcomes, create the kinds of experiences we want our students to have, right? And we can use those, and we can retrofit those into about any space, right? So we did it here, and we can do it with about any size group. And there are lots of different ways of doing this, and this is just a very simple kind of example to take away from. So I'm quickly running out of time here. Any questions about anything before we finish up? Yes, sir.
With all the different devices, how do you deal with BYOD?
Sure.
The real technical students probably don't want to do like around the video.
Certainly, if they prefer, and they do. So even when we have situations where we'll provide a collection of iPads or something like that, if they have their own want to use it, great, have at it. But they're kind of on their own at that point, and so if they have to make sure they have like all the right tools set up and these kinds of things. And so in many cases they do, and as long as they're good with that, then there's no problem. Sure, box generally. And then sometimes the faculty kind of set up their own, they'll create like a Google Drive and they'll throw them in there, or it's kind of a mixture. But institutionally, we provide box for that. Yeah. Sometimes they just when they want to share them up, sometimes they'll just cut them in iMovie on the iPad and then just upload it to YouTube, and they can share it right off the device. Yep. Any other questions about anything? All right, well, thank you very much for your time this morning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen. Let her lead you forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing with us today, Kyle. We certainly appreciate it. My name is Kristen Bailey. I'm the Senior Manager of Technology and Learning, and just want to welcome you to a day of learning. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to remind you, in your bags, you should have had a program, so we're going to take just a moment to look at our next breakout sessions. So session A is going to be 3 teaching hacks to boost evals and reduce stress. That'll be in 337, which is right over here. Then session B is going to be, is anyone reading my work? Metrics for evaluating the impact of your research, which will be in 341, around the corner. And then the third session will be using mobile devices for student engagement in 342, which is also around the corner. If there are 2 sessions that are happening simultaneously and you really wanted to attend both of them, please know, with the exception of Apple, all of the sessions will be recorded and put on our website. So just choose one, and then the videos will be available a little bit later. So we're going to do 2 breakout sessions back to back, and then as Jerry mentioned, our lunch will be in room 203. So please grab some more coffee and snacks on your way out, and the next session is due to start at 9:50. Thank you.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah. So how'd they do? I wasn't able to see this part. Did they?
It's over there. The orange one over there.
Orange one?
Or no, was it? The orange one had 21. The black one had 26. I think.
Oh, good. Excellent.
You're gonna give it another go. You weren't satisfied. That's good. That's good.